Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, it's a big one. We're going to be talking about the newest album from Post Malone called Hollywood's Bleeding. You know, it's weird thinking about how my opinions have evolved on Post Malone over the past 4 or so years. Throughout 2015 and 2016, I could not stand the guy on the back of a badly produced, slapdash debut album called Stoney that to this day features some of my least favorite hits of this decade. Then 2017 happened, and despite some of the asinine public remarks from him on hip-hop culture, we also got Candy Paint, which was included on his sophomore album Beer Bongs and Bentleys, and it wound up being one of my favorite songs of the following year. Not just hits, songs. Then I wound up seeing him live at a festival in 2018. And then saw him live again in 2019. And the strange feeling is that many of my lingering issues hadn't gone away. I still didn't really like his warble, his lyrics could stray into ugly or outright stupid territory, his choice of guest stars was questionable, it was always a crapshoot if they bothered to care or show up, and it was hard to shake the feeling that he was leveraging hip-hop culture for crossover success while never quite fitting in as well as he really should. And yet, as the production brought in thicker atmosphere to cushion his voice, as he picked up rougher and more organic groove sections behind him to lean into a pop track sound that was increasingly distinct, and then he worked to crank up his live presence with some surprisingly raw intensity in his voice, he actually stuck around and picked up more fame and hype with every album. And while I'm not going to say he ever really won me over, I was certainly curious about how Hollywood's Bleeding would turn out. The guest stars seemed kind of intriguing, and the lead-off singles like Wow and Goodbyes with Young Thug, they did have some promise, they kind of grew on me, as well as including Sunflower with Swae Lee on the project, a song that I never really loved, but I've also never gotten tired of this entire year. So okay, fine, how is Hollywood's Bleeding? Well, I'm gonna say something that might seem contradictory. Hollywood's Bleeding is Post Malone's best album to date, but it's also by far his safest album, and that's gonna get dinged by a lot of folks, and especially critics in that regard, especially given that it doesn't have the most stark emotional high points that captivated audiences from his last 2 albums, quality notwithstanding. What I can say definitively is that if Post Malone doesn't vary or shake up the formula on later albums, he could be in real trouble. He might have hit the ceiling with this sound specifically, but for the first time in his career, I can actually see where he might be able to stick the landing if he pivots well. And he probably could. He's got potential. He writes decent hooks, and this is actually a decent album. And the strange thing is that Post Malone seems to have dialed into a formula that feels significantly more consistent than on his first 2 albums. And the majority of that, it comes through in the production. Going back to Stoney, or even some of the worst moments on Beer Bongs and Bentleys, Post Malone has a powerful and distinctive voice. I mean, for better or worse, as that warble he does still isn't grown on me. But when the rawness of the live performances does not translate on the album, you ideally want to cushion his voice, especially his upper register crooning and his falsetto and enough reverb, auto-tune, and a cavernous mix in order to give him more presence. I mean, on previous albums when he didn't get that production, the trap groove sounded really cheap and underproduced. And while there is a part of me that still thinks that organic percussion and live drums would be a more natural fit against the guitar tones that Post Malone likes, electric and acoustic, and that says nothing about the bass, if you throw in more of that humid, sweltering mix, it can kind of blend all the tones together, all that roughness, while still working to prioritize the melodies or grooves. Now, that's not saying that's the only formula that works here. Wow's got this spare, rumbling clatter against the bassy knock that's not quite as swampy, but I still like it. And I'd be remiss to mention that this isn't all that far removed from what Travis Scott's been doing since Astroworld last year, but Post Malone's also pulling from a different subset of melodic influences that does set him apart in his own unique lane. This is also, by the way, one of the biggest factors that sets Post Malone apart from the imitators like Juice WRLD, as despite a fondness for similar eras of rock, Post Malone eschews the more embarrassing mid-2000s pop emo caterwauling for a slightly older, mid-90s inspired and kind of heavier tradition of rock. Hell, parts of the melody line from Allergic, they aren't that far removed from vintage 50s and 60s rock, as are the oddly retro-sounding grooves of 1,000 Bad Times and Myself. And that's not even to touch on the heavier Ozzy Osbourne collaboration on Take What You Want, which at first made about as much sense as when Ozzy did that Peter Gabriel cover with Cold Chamber like over a decade ago, but with the slightly more organic percussion in that guitar solo, it somehow managed to stick the landing for me. Hell, at its best, while Post Malone seemed to have pretensions of being a rock star before, this is the first album where he's actually trying to write the tuneful but huge hooks in order to get there more organically, muscle himself into that pantheon, which might work a little better if he actually chose to work with more rock acts instead of hip-hop artists who sound increasingly out of place on this album. Yeah, let's not mince words. With the exception of SZA on Staring at the Sun, which is a song that basically sounds like a better produced copy of Sunflower, which directly follows this song and prompts a really questionable comparison, but most of the guest stars can't make Post Malone's sound work for them whatsoever, or they show a compromise that flatters nobody. Enemies is the first example with that, with the more spare, watery plucks in order to support the spare trap beat for DaBaby, where nobody really impresses, let's be honest here. But the real faceplant comes with Meek Mill and On the Road, who just cannot ride this groove whatsoever and sounds flat out embarrassing with that flow. Then there's Future on Die For Me, a miserable slice of self-loathing that he should be able to easily nail if he didn't make the asinine decision to hop into his weedy upper register again. I'm surprised to say it, but Halsey's verse effectively steals the entire song. She proved with Juice WRLD on the Without Me remix she can handle this sort of material, and with this, she kinda confirmed it. And while I'm more underwhelmed by both Young Thug and Travis Scott, the former because of his verse on Goodbyes features some tonal whiplash that borders on comic, even if the song has kinda grown on me, the latter just feeling kinda disposable. But I think the larger problem is that Post Malone just can't find many people who are produced to match his presence or level of intensity with this production, only amplified by his embrace of much stronger melodies and so many hooks. Now, I could say that's very revealing. Now, Post Malone's set of influences in trap aren't really tied to pure hip-hop, and thus rappers sounding jarring and out of place in his mono-genre world that might be more telling than it should be. And you know, while it might be true for some of the more melodic songs, I also get the feeling that many of the rap features could have stuck the landing if they cared to try as much as Post Malone does. And like with previous appearances, and like with previous guests, I'm not sure they really bothered, and that's kind of a shame. And yet this takes us to the content and the songwriting, normally the place where I've torn Post Malone to shreds time and time again, and make no mistake, he's not getting out of this scot-free, but that's more because some of his lines are more embarrassing than outright atrocious or really questionable. Saint Tropez, it's a prime example with the Bradley Pitt and how he's been doing what he wants since Fetus, and I'm sorry, whenever he references a pop rock band like the Jonas Brothers and I Know and Fall Out Boy on WoW, I just cannot help but roll my eyes. And that's before we get On the Road, where he's looking at his plaques while he's taking a shit. Congratulations, you now have the image of Post Malone on the toilet in your head. You're welcome. And yet, for as opulent as Internet is, produced by Kanye West because of course it was, I always found songs of bitching about social media to be incredibly underwhelming, and yeah, this is no exception. But you know what, to Post Malone's dubious credit, while I've always found it a little difficult to fully buy into his angst, I can't deny he's gotten better at expressing it. And it's almost entirely coming through his framing and a little bit of self-awareness. For one, he doesn't nearly come across as bitter as he used to. Take the lead off title track. For as much as there is some flexing here in his chase of fame and castigation of Los Angeles' phoniness, he does admit he's bought into it. A similar balance that actually makes 1,000 Bad Times kinda click for me, where he almost seems like he's along for the ride. He's just all that disposable the relationship is, and I kind of appreciate the breeziness of the groove there. And that embrace of the toxic cycle also works on Allergic, where it's clear the drug addiction is getting him more pleasure than anything else there, especially the relationship. And to a lesser extent, it kind of works on Circles, even if I'm kind of lukewarm on that song at best. Yeah, Die For Me is oversold, and honestly reminds me a little too much of the same petulance behind Bruno Mars' song Grenade, but having Future and Halsey also play roles does dilute the self-absorption there, and dialing into pure hyperbole of the melodrama and Take What You Want is exactly how to make a song like that kind of work, at least on an emotional level. And these songs are balanced out with tracks that do seem a little bit more intentionally upbeat and self-assured, from the back and forth questions of ego on staring at the sun to try and find some way to make it work. Now he's just trying to catch the vibe amidst all his success on I Gotta Be and the Josh Tillman co-written song Myself. Yeah, they're both songs are self-indulgent and awash in ego, but minus the small-minded pettiness of previous projects, they actually balance out a little bit better. There's more to them I like. But as such, look, I can't call this a deep by any stretch, and Post Malone again might have hit the ceiling of how far he can push this specific sound without expanding into more organic production. Louis Bell and Frank Dukes arguably pull in some quality work, but imagine how much more sizzle and promise you'd get from Post Malone if, say, he picked up from more rock-leaning producers like Rick Rubin or Jay Joyce, or worked with more of the textured organic trap producers like Zaytoven, or reunited with Metro Boomin, who kicked off a lot of this sound thanks to Congratulations back in 2016-2017. And it would be a struggle for me to call this more mature per se, but it does feel a little more measured and a shade bit more wise, with Post Malone dialing into tunes that actually work for him and a more distinctive sound. And now again, it is safe for him, and there's nothing close to a candy paint here, and that's kind of disappointing, but I did kind of wind up liking this. It's getting a 6 out of 10 and a recommendation, especially if you found Post Malone's worst tendencies before kind of insufferable, just like I did. I don't know, maybe it's just a process of him wearing me down, but I'd argue he has gotten better. And when you consider this as more of a streamlined package, yeah, you know what the hell. Go ahead, check it out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Yeah, this is one of those projects I'm kind of lukewarm on. It's good, it's not great, but it works. And hey, I'm going to talk about it a lot more in Billboard Breakdown next week anyway. Not the episode coming up tomorrow, but the week after, so stay tuned for that. But hey, you want to buy or stream the album, links down in the description below. And I got the poll up there. I am curious where people fall on this, especially the diehard Post Malone fans, because again, I can see some of them being a little more lukewarm in comparison with his first two albums, because it does not hit the same highs per se. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you're looking for episodes of Billboard Breakdown or want to see more on the channel, links in the card right over here. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.